One second, I'll introduce you. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to International Weekly Meeting in association with CMAAO. We are on 82nd session. This is 30th of October, 2021. And we are live on social media platform. Today, it is our privilege to invite Dr. Tom Brand. He's a founder of thedoctor.com. He's also the Faculty Institute of Functional Medicine, Chief Health Officer at Novell, and he will introduce a topic, building resilience to the viral exposure. Over to Dr. Tom.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agarwal. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I thought that I would give an overview of how we build resilience and a couple of the factors that may not be commonly known. So I'll start with some basic concepts, and if it's okay, I'd like to share my screen and show some slides, which I'll go for about 15 minutes. My understanding is that I can use that about 15 to 20 minutes of time for that to introduce a few basic principles. And the first principle that I would introduce here is what's the most prevalent pathology at the root of practically all disease. We want to remember that we're not just fighting a virus, we're trying to create a body that is resilient and resistant to attack. From that point of view, if we take a big picture, almost an umbrella overview, what's the most prevalent pathology at the root of practically all disease? We see that, one of the most important discoveries of the past 2 decades has been that the immune system generating inflammatory responses are involved in not just a few select disorders, but a wide variety. And we're, of course, very concerned about an overactive immune system right now with this current pandemic. So chronic inflammatory diseases have been recognized as the most significant cause of death in the world today. And we forget about just that big picture overview of an inflammatory response that our immune system has been activated. And the way that we describe it with our patients is that, Mrs. Patient, your immune system is the armed forces in your body. It's the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard. It's the response mechanism to protect you. So the question is, what is it trying to protect you from? And I'd like to bring to light a couple of points that are not commonly thought about that may contribute to and often set the stage for an overactive immune system. Inflammation's involved at least 8 of the top 10 leading causes of death in the US today. And the only 2 of the top 10 causes of death that are not inflammatory are accidents, unintentional accidents, and suicides. Everything else in the top 10 causes of death are inflammatory. So this concept that inflammation is at the base of our body's response in developing what turns into a pathological response is one that we can't forget. And a question that we often encourage our practitioners to think about when they're working with their patients is it a brain cell that's inflamed or a kidney cell? Is it gasoline or kerosene? Is it petrol or oil? Where is the inflammation coming from? And our premise is if we reduce the underlying base level of inflammation in a person's body, their immune system can more appropriately respond to a threat that's coming in. And this drawing really says it all that came out about 1.5 years ago, where systemic chronic inflammation is at the center of practically every disease, whether it's an immune response, an overactive or immune response, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, depression, neurodegenerative diseases, sarcopenia, osteoporosis. These are inflammatory. We all know they're inflammatory. We take it for granted, and perhaps we'll give an anti-inflammatory. But if we're not addressing the triggers that are initiating the immune response, we have one, if there's a bonfire in the body and we have one garden hose pouring water on the fire to try to put it out, we're taking anti-inflammatories, but then we have another garden hose pouring gasoline on the fire, causing it to flare up in our lifestyle. And many times we don't think about that and how we might be able to reduce the amount of inflammatory triggers that our patients are dealing with on a daily basis. Shifts in the inflammatory response from short to long lived can cause a breakdown of immune tolerance. We lose tolerance, we'll lose our resilience, as well as, and lead to major alterations in every tissue and every organ in the body. So if we can identify some of the common triggers that our patients are dealing with on a daily basis, initiating an inflammatory response from their lifestyle, if we can address some of those, we give our patients a better chance to have an appropriate response when a threat comes in, such as a viral exposure. As an example, if you're living in a moldy house and you're breathing mold 24 hours a day or whenever you're at home, that triggers a constant inflammatory response. There is no adaptation to mold exposure. Our bodies have a tolerance for it. And when we cross that level of tolerance, now a chronic systemic inflammatory response will begin. That's just one example, and now I'm going to talk about a few others in that. So a question that I would ask for our practitioners is, what presenting complaints in your practice are not inflammatory? And we take it for granted. Of course, it's inflammation, but we don't address the triggers of inflammation with our patients. And sometimes a very common trigger can be recognized and identified. And if we can reduce that patient's exposure, we allow their immune system to allocate its precious energy to the appropriate threat that's currently coming in. So I'd like to move to, if we agree that chronic inflammation is the fuel on the fire for the vast majority of our patients, how critical is it to educate our patients on reducing their triggers? I think it's paramount, it's primary. Of course, we need to deal with the acute symptoms a person is presenting with, but if we can also address the fuel on the fire in their lifestyles, we can enhance an appropriate immune response in that patient. Just as crude toxic compounds originating from cigarette exposure are a well-established cause of various health conditions, many different toxicants originating from other day-to-day exposures are bioaccumulating in people and causing a multitude of health conditions. If we look in the literature, we see that sensitivity-related illnesses are paramount, and with descriptions of a credible causal mechanism to account for much of the emerging pandemic of multi-system health problems. And this pathogenesis relates to a phenomenon called toxicant-induced loss of tolerance. And I'm proposing that many of our patients that are overreacting with an exposure to this current virus that is a big threat, that they have toxicant-induced loss of tolerance. They can't tolerate this viral exposure, and it runs rampant, and then our immune system overreacts as a result. That there's a toxic level of accumulation in our patients' tissues from a lifetime of minor exposures, and that this may set them up to have an overactive immune response. When the toxicant burden within an individual reaches a certain threshold, the immune system often provokes a low-grade systemic inflammation, as in the drawing that I showed you earlier, and with substantial changes in cytokine profiles, and we produce a cytokine storm. It's fairly common to see that. And this can magnify and respond to inciting exposures with the release of a storm of bioactive compounds. The abnormal immune response might be triggered by inciting exposures such as foods. Foods are very common exposure. Inhalants, as I give the example of mold, chemicals, and even electrical incidents. Application of appropriate interventions to avoid incident triggers and to facilitate elimination of the burden, the toxic burden, reverses this state of toxin-induced loss of tolerance and consistently results in, as these authors say, remarkable recovery from sensitivity-related illnesses. So I want to move over to what are the mechanisms that set the stage for the production of excessive endogenous and exogenous molecules of inflammation. And for that, we're going to go to Professor Alessio Fasano, who is a professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, professor of nutrition, Harvard School of Public Health, chief of pediatric gastroenterology, Mass General at Harvard, the director of the Mucosal Immunology Center at Harvard, the director of the Celiac Research Center at Harvard. I mean, any one of these titles is a lifelong goal for someone at the top of their field, and he has five of these titles. We think he's going to win the Nobel Prize one day. We truly do. He and his team identified the protein zonulin, which is the active response mechanism causing pathogenic intestinal permeability, and which has progressed into a slang term, the leaky gut. But they've been writing about this for over 20 years now. Professor Fasano was always very careful in his languaging to make sure that he's not misunderstood. And I would ask you to take a look at the title of the paper that he published about 1.5 years ago. All disease begins in the leaky gut, and the role of zonulin in the pathogenesis of chronic inflammatory diseases. And he says that there's a perfect storm, and I propose that if we look at our patients from this point of view, it guides us into thinking of some new tools that may help enhance a patient's response to viral exposures that they may be getting right now. And what is this perfect storm? Well, I love this picture because you see this man leaning against the wall of a lighthouse with his left knee bent and the foot on the wall and his hands in his pocket, quite relaxed in the midst of the chaos around him. This is the perfect storm that Professor Fasano is talking about, that of genetic vulnerability, and we know you really can't do anything about your genes. That's the deck of cards that you've been dealt in life. Environmental triggers, which genes don't turn on and off. Genes operate on a dimmer switch, and the goal is to dim down the genes of inflammation and ramp up the genes of anti-inflammation. That's our goal. And environmental triggers actually have their hands on the dimmer switch, turning them up or turning them down, depending on what environmental triggers we are exposed to. For example, many of us have heard that 1 cup of blueberries a day in 3 years will reverse cognitive decline of up to 13 years. So people are thinking as well as they were 13 years ago by having a cup of blueberries every day, because the polyphenols in blueberries turn up the genes of anti-inflammation and turn down the genes of inflammation in the brain. So environmental triggers have their hands on the switch of the dimmer switch of our genetic exposures and expressions. Number 3 here is the altered microbiome created by the environmental triggers that we are exposed to. Number 4, that altered microbiome is an inflammatory microbiome which creates intestinal permeability. And when you have excessive intestinal permeability, you get these larger molecules getting through into the submucosa and into the bloodstream before they've been digested properly. The way we explain this to our patients is, Mrs. Patients, your digestive tract is a tube. It goes for 20, 25 feet, kind of winds around in the center. The inside of the tube is lined with cheesecloth. And in the US, cheesecloth is a cloth that For example, our grandmothers would pour gravy into a cheesecloth and the liquid comes out the other side, but the clumps stay on one side, that it only allows really small molecules to get through. So the inside lining of the intestines is lined with cheesecloth that is restrictive as to what it allows to get into the body. Intestinal permeability is when you get tears in the cheesecloth. And if you have a tear in the cheesecloth, now a larger molecule, a macromolecule, gets through into the submucosa and into the bloodstream before it's been broken down small enough. Think of proteins like a pearl necklace, and hydrochloric acid undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you have a string of pearls. And our digestive enzymes act as scissors to cut that pearl necklace into smaller and smaller pieces. Snip, 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 until you're down to each pearl of the pearl necklace, which goes right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. And these are the amino acids that our bodies use to build new bone cells and new brain cells. When you have tears in the cheesecloth, larger molecules, clumps of the pearl necklace, get through before they've had enough time to be broken down properly. And when they get through into the bloodstream, your immune system says, what is this? I better fight this thing. And now you make antibodies to chicken or to tomatoes or to bananas. It doesn't matter what the food is. If a macromolecule gets through into the submucosa and into the bloodstream before it's been broken down small enough, the immune system trying to protect you is going to fight this thing, which is number 5 in Professor Fasano's list of a perfect storm, the systemic immune response. So this is an immune system trying to protect you that gets overactive and creates an inflammatory response in the body. And it's the 3 in the middle that as clinicians, we have a lot of control over and the ability to make changes. The environmental triggers our patients are exposed to, the altered microbiome, and intestinal permeability. So although there are dozens of environmental triggers, what are the big kahunas? And Professor Fasano tells us that there are 2 that are most prevalent, and that is small exposure to large amounts of bacteria, lipopolysaccharides, and gluten have been identified as the 2 most powerful triggers, creating intestinal permeability. This is what they're teaching at Harvard Medical School right now. Our young gastroenterologists, our future gastroenterologists, this is what they're being taught right now, that LPS and gluten are the most common triggers initiating pathogenic intestinal permeability. The activation of the zonulin pathway, creating intestinal permeability, may represent a defensive mechanism that flushes out microorganisms, contributing to the innate immune response of the host against changes in microbiome ecosystem. Gluten is misinterpreted by the zonulin pathway as a potential harmful component of a bug. And Mrs. Patient, our bodies are just the same as our ancestors thousands of years ago. We have the same gallbladder, the same functioning liver, the same kidneys, the same immune system. And our ancestors, when they were foraging for food, first they would sniff the food to make sure it was safe. Then they would nibble on it. And then if it was okay, they would eat it. But if there were pathogens in that food that were not dominant enough to be identified by the screening mechanisms we have, and they get into the stomach, these pathogens swallowed with the food, it's the job of hydrochloric acid in the stomach to kill them. If hydrochloric acid did not kill them and the pathogen comes out of the stomach into the proximal part of the small intestine, we have sentries standing guard there called toll-like receptor 4. And toll-like receptor 4's job is to identify if a bug is coming out of the stomach into the proximal part of the small intestine. If it identifies the protein structure of the surface of a pathogen, toll-like receptor 4 comes into action. Now, the problem here for us all over the world is that the protein structure of gluten represents the surface protein structure of many different pathogens. And gluten is misinterpreted by the zonulin pathway by toll-like receptor 4 as a potential harmful component of a bug. And Professor Maureen Leonard, also at Harvard, very famous gastroenterologist, she did a literature review that she published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. I think it was 64 studies or 67. And her summary is that previous studies have shown that gliadin in wheat causes immediate and transient increase in gut permeability. And this process takes place in everyone who ingests gluten, without exception, in all individuals, whether we have symptoms from it or not. We are activating this inflammatory cascade in our gut every time we're exposed to wheat. And gliadin activates toll-like receptor 4. Toll-like receptor 4 is the receptor of the 10 toll-like receptors. Toll-like receptor 4 is activated for LPS, lipopolysaccharides. And this study that came out of a joint effort at Harvard and a university in Germany and in London, they injected a dye into the vasculature that would be flowing right past the duodenal epithelium. And they used confocal endomicroscopy to view that dye flowing by in the area. So they put a tube down into the gut, into the small intestine with a camera on it, and they watched to see what happened to the dye when they introduced gluten into the lumen of the intestine. And I want to show you what happened here. This is a still shot over 5 minutes of the dye passing through the intestinal lining when gluten was exposed. So it's 5 minutes that they still shots. They narrowed down to just under a minute. So let me turn this one on here. And what you're going to see, watch the white dye. Watch what happens. This camera is in the lumen of the gut, and you see the white is getting a little brighter, but now at about 3 o'clock, you see in between the cells, there is some white dye leaking out. Now at 1 o'clock, you see that burst up there. And this is intestinal permeability as it's happening. And it's just wonderful to see intestinal permeability. And this occurred within 5 minutes. And this occurs in all individuals who consume gluten. So if you trust for now that the studies quoted here are accurate, and we can spend hours talking about this, there's so much evidence of this, which patients with systemic inflammation would you not test for a loss of tolerance to gluten? Because if they've lost tolerance to it, and every time they're exposed to it, it's gasoline on the fire causing more inflammation, it sets them up to have an overactive response when they're exposed to this current virus that we're dealing with. And toll-like receptor 4 activates not only zonulin release, but it also activates NF-kappa B, the major amplifier of inflammation. And toll-like receptor 4 also increases the signaling of the microbiota, and it alters in terms of the quantity of the microbiota, the composition, and the richness because of this inflammatory cascade that is initiated when toll-like receptor 4 becomes active. It may play an important role in maintaining the fine balance between tolerance and inflammatory properties of gut microbiota by regulating innate immunity. I bring this up because wheat is one of the most common foods eaten in the world today, multiple times a day. And if patients don't have any symptoms, we don't think there's a problem. But we now know that every exposure to wheat, that this inflammatory cascade, this activation by an immune system trying to protect the individual from what it considers to be a microorganism, that this happens in every individual. So a small amount of exposure to gluten and large amounts of pathogenic bacteria and its exhaust LPS increases zonulin, increasing permeability, activates the inflammatory cascade of NF-kappa B, alters the microbiota in terms of quantity, composition, and richness. This happens in every human who consumes wheat within 5 minutes of wheat coming out of the stomach. And these mechanisms are not limited to gluten, but include other components of wheat, such as our amylase trypsin inhibitors, wheat germagglutinin. And it's a terrifying picture, and it's challenging. And it takes some time to work with patients to transition their eating style. But is there a time when gluten would not activate toll-like receptor 4? And the answer is no. No, there's a lot of research trying to shut down that mechanism, but nothing has been shown yet to be successful at that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and bring it up now if for any questions that may come up. My point here is that we want to reduce the inflammatory cascade for our patients so that they have more reserves in their immune system to appropriately respond to this current viral threat.
Thank you, Dr. Tom.
Yes, of course.
Can we open the floor for the question answers?
Dr. Tom, you were telling about the wheat. Actually, recently also came to know that wheat also causes this problem. But that is because of the glycemic index. In case of diabetic patients, the doctors we advise to take wheat instead of rice, where the rice is the prime food. So, what is the solution here?
Well, we know that the glycemic index of wheat is 71 or 72, depending on which paper you read on that. The glycemic index of wheat is higher than a Snickers bar, than a candy bar, that it's not a safe food to balance one's glycemic response. And we never encourage substituting wheat as a lower glycemic index food compared to white rice or any other foods. So I'm hard pressed to think of a mechanism by which wheat would be contributing to stabilizing blood sugar and insulin resistance. I don't know of a mechanism by which it would do that.
But is advised, in a country and others have seen it.
What advice? I see. Yes, thank you for the question. Part of the key here, and if we look at Professor Fasano's overview, the umbrella overview of the 5 factors, the place where we want to put our attention is in reducing the environmental triggers and creating a more diverse, healthy microbiome. And in doing that, our counsel to patients, one of the components of rebuilding a healthy microbiome, you see, wheat in the Western diet, 78 to 81% of the prebiotics in the Western diet come from the arabinose islands of wheat. And so when you take wheat out of the diet, we're removing the prebiotics that patient's gut has been dependent on probably throughout their life. And so we have to replace the prebiotics in that patient's diet with healthy prebiotics. And we give 3 recommendations for that. First, Mrs. Patient, when you go shopping, I want you to buy a couple of every root vegetable in the store. Turnips, parsnips, rutabaga, radishes, carrots, sweet potatoes, not too many white potatoes because of the glycemic index question. And every day you have 1 root vegetable. And you just go online and you can find recipes to cook root vegetables, and you'll find something that you and your family like in terms of how to prepare them. That's number 1, every day 1 root vegetable. Number 2, You go on Google and you type in list of prebiotic foods, print the list out, put it on your refrigerator. And every day you have 2 from the list. And patients will learn that a banana is a prebiotic, yucca is a prebiotic, onions, garlic are prebiotics. So we train them to be thinking every day to include prebiotics in their diet, 1 root vegetable and 2 from the list. And the third thing we do is for a short period of time, perhaps 2 months, we suggest that they use a prebiotic supplement while they're transitioning over, just to make sure there's no downtime. And most patients are receptive to doing a supplement if it's available to them for a couple of months. So we teach them lifestyle habits so that they include prebiotics as part of everyday life. And we encourage them, if they can, to get a supplement during the transition period.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Brien, for your comments and your presentation. I find this to be very interesting, taking the knowledge of toll-like receptors, looking at a new protein over the past 20 years, zonulin, looking at how our gut, which is one of the largest immune organs, plays a role in overall health and maintaining that balance of our immune system. When I look at this prebiotic list and what we see, at least from Asian diets versus North American diets, I grew up with a very, almost a 90% Asian diet, and I had gluten as a very small source of my food intake. When you transition to a more North American European diet, you do have much more processed gluten, and that might be the case as well. But I'm happy to see that lentils are part of the prebiotic list, because
Yes.
in most of our diets, we do consume lentils. But my question is, I didn't look into this further, is where yogurt is. We also consume yogurt on an everyday basis. Is that a prebiotic? Is that a probiotic? And what is the difference between the two?
Very good question. The second recommendation to our patients, we have a list of how to rebuild a healthy microbiome. First is the prebiotic. Well, first is stop throwing gasoline on the fire. So you have to identify what the offending agents are in that patient's environmental trigger history. Gluten is a very common one, and there can be others. The second is the prebiotics. The third, Mrs. Patient, when you go shopping, get 5 different types of fermented vegetables. Get sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, fermented beets, curry flavored, whatever you like. And every day, have 1 tablespoon of fermented vegetables. What the science tells us is that 1 tablespoon a day increases the bacterial count in our food 10,000-fold. Not 10%, 10,000-fold increase by a tablespoon a day. And so what we want to do is inoculate the microbiome of our guts with healthy bacteria. And we encourage them, don't just eat sauerkraut, don't just eat kimchi, because every vegetable, as it ferments, produces different families of probiotics. And so we want to inoculate on a daily basis with minute amounts of families of probiotic bacteria. To your question about yogurt, I've not seen any evidence of it as a prebiotic. It could be, I'm just not aware of that it falls in the category of a probiotic. However, we do know that commercialized yogurts lose a lot of their potency because bacteria won't live in pasteurized milk very long. So although the labeling on a container of yogurt will list how many colony-forming units, millions or billions it may have at manufacture, and that's accurate, but over the course of the shelf life of that product, the bacterial count diminishes substantially. So it's not the preferred way of re-inoculating a microbiome with beneficial bacteria. We encourage our families to start. And if your children do not want to take fermented vegetables, just put your spoon in the jar and take the juice and put the juice, mix it with their peanut butter or, mix it with their mashed potatoes. Just get it in. They don't have to taste it. They don't have to chew it. So if you can hide it in their foods, you'll be successful in re-inoculating the gut with more beneficial bacteria.
Thank you for that. I do have one more question. Where do pickles fall in this?
If they're fermented, very well. But if they're just soaked in vinegar, I'm unaware of the bacterial count in vinegar-soaked pickles.
Thank you.
Dr. Pilla here. It's a very informative and interesting discussion. And is there any role for supplementing probiotics which are available? Second is, of course, the gastroenterologists now are started treating patients phycotherapy. It's something which is becoming more popular. And here the inflammatory response are definitely reduced with these phycotherapy. Any comments on that?
In terms of probiotics, we know there's hundreds and hundreds of studies of the beneficial effects of probiotics. We now know, however, that it's unlikely that much of the probiotic supplements that people take actually make it to the small and large intestine, that most of it is killed by the hydrochloric acid in the stomach. But wait, there's benefit, there's symptom relief. How does this happen? We now know it's horizontal gene transfer, that the genes of the supplemental bacteria, the bacteria may have been destroyed, but their genetic material passes through and will transfer into the microbiome that is in the gut of that patient. So my concern, and I cut my teeth on supplements with probiotics. I opened my practice in 1980, and back then we were talking about the Lactobacillus acidophilus and bifidobacterium, and people thought we were speaking Greek. No one had heard those terms before and didn't know what they meant. And we've helped thousands of people, of course, with supplements. Personally, I prefer the fermented vegetable approach, but there's no question that the supplements do work. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your second question.
The phycotherapy, that means the
fecal therapy.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of literature that suggests it's a beneficial approach. The unknown, and many of these studies will reference this and some don't, but the unknown is the impact of the viruses that are being transferred with fecal therapy. It's an unknown. We don't know what will happen down the road with that one. But in terms of symptom relief with colitis and some Crohn's patients and other GI complaints, it's been very promising.
Thank you.
Anybody else has a question? Dr. Tom, any science which talks about this soya products? I think soya products are gaining a lot of attraction, and especially in Asian countries. We know that dairy products, there's a lot of lactose intolerance. Anything on soya products for?
Yes, in the confocal endomicroscopy study that Professor Detlef Chupin did, and I showed you the video of that one. They checked 4 different foods. They checked wheat, dairy, soy, and yeast. And wheat was the most prevalent to cause this problem, but in 13 out of 36 people, so it was not a little less than 1/3 of those who were exposed to soy, they had the same increased zonulin and increased intestinal permeability within 5 minutes. So it was not quite 1/3 of the people who were exposed to soy had that same response. So it's a fairly common activator of pathogenic intestinal permeability, activating NF-kappa B, in systemic inflammatory response. So the rule in our practice, and it's not feasible across an entire culture, and I recognize that, and I recognize that people that come to us and over the years are privileged because they have resources that many people don't. But the rule in our practice is test, don't guess, and check to see, does this patient have a sensitivity to wheat? Does this patient have a sensitivity to soy? Does this patient have a sensitivity to dairy? And if testing is unavailable, then it's better, in my opinion, it's better to err on the side of safety and eliminate the food or replace that food with other options that are a bit safer.
Do you suggest any kind of foods, like any recommendations on the food?
Yes, our guidelines for all of our patients are very similar. There's two basic guidelines on food selections. The first one is the rainbow diet, that we encourage people to follow the rainbow diet, which means as many colors of the rainbow as possible. And our goal is to teach our patients to count them. And their goal is 50 different foods per week, 50 different foods. And blueberries, purple cabbage, red raspberries. It's the polyphenols that we want to increase in every meal that a person eats. And we encourage all of our practitioners to work with a registered dietitian, a nutritionist, a health coach, someone who's trained in this area to guide the patients into transitioning their lifestyle into more varieties of fruits and vegetables. So root vegetables, fruits and vegetables, and quality meats are where we suggest our patients focus their main attention.
And what about bitter food? Like, we in India give a lot of importance to the bitter food, like, and the leafy vegetables and like, which are bitter, like, I don't know. But there are a lot of bitter foods which, we talk about it, which reduces the inflammation as well. Dr.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The bitters are an excellent supportive category of foods. Watercress, for example, and garden cress, these bitter greens, arugula, they have high concentrations of polyphenols and antioxidants in them. And so including those in a mixture of a salad, not enough to be a strong bitter taste in their meal, but enough to have a little bit, kind of tickle you with a little bit of bitters on a daily basis can be highly beneficial, supporting the immune system.
Thank you. So do we have any more questions on the floor?
I see that my friend Ishi Khalsa is here, the director of the Celiac Society of India. And Ishi is a nutritionist, and Ishi can speak to the bitters and including those in the diet much better than I can.
Yeah, we had her in one of our sessions already, and we will have another session with her very soon.
Marvelous.
Hello.
Just
Hello.
Yes.
Surab,
Hello.
Surab, can I
Yes,
ask?
Dr.
Surab?
Surab. Absolutely.
Okay. Actually, I missed most of the part of the presentation of Dr. Tom, but I just heard about a word immunity and the beneficial foods Dr. Tom informed us. But I would like to know, okay, being ENT surgeon, my observation is when the immunity is going down, then the ENT problem is increases, like the flu and the throat problem and everything. So my observation is that the people who do not have a regular sleep of 7 to 8 hours in the night, they have these all problems. So though, to boost your immunity, the night sleep is very, very important, at least for 7 to 8 hours. How do you confirm this statement? Please, thank you very much, Dr. Tom.
That's a very good question. We tell our patients that the only time they heal,
Hello.
is when they're sleeping, when they're in a parasympathetic dominant state. And if they're not getting quality sleep, it's critically important to work on that. And we have a sleep therapist that we often recommend people to, so that they can develop the habits for better quality sleep. You're absolutely right. It's critically important.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes. There's one more thing that I would comment on about the rainbow diet and the emphasis on polyphenols. There were some studies that came out early last year that showed the higher the polyphenol content, the lower the ability of this current virus to bind onto the ACE2 receptor. So the more polyphenols in a person's diet, the more resistance they have to allowing the virus, if they're exposed to the virus, allowing that virus to get inside their cells and to shed. So we tell patients that the more blueberries they eat, the more red raspberries, the more blackberries, the more variety they have, the more protection they get.
Absolutely. We in India, like through our channel, we have almost everywhere we've discussed about the rainbow diet, have all the colors in your diet. And the second important factor we do is eat most, like, the bitter foods is what we recommend. So there is another product which we used to call as Talmeg. That powder is very common over here, which people drink.
Pani, Pani.
So if we don't have any more questions, we can go for the country update. We still have 15-20 minutes to go forward. Anyone quickly, if you have a question? Okay, so we will now move forward with the country updates. I would be very happy to introduce our regular partners are Australia, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Macau, Malaysia, Myanmar, Nepal, New Zealand, Pakistan, Philippines, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Taiwan, and Malaysia. This is what makes CMAAO. And with this, I would like to invite Dr. Ravi for giving an update for Malaysia.
Thank you, Saurabh. First, let me thank Dr. Tom for a wonderful presentation, which, as usual, has been very enlightening. Now, coming back to Malaysia, things are improving in Malaysia. The number of cases are now hovering around between the 5,000 to 6,000 per day. Deaths are maintaining at about 60 to 70 a day. The government has now, what they've done is they've opened up all sectors. There's dining in allowed, cinemas allowed, swimming pools they allow, but all with very strict SOPs, and mandatory wearing of face mask and maintaining of SOPs is in place. But saying that, we are now starting off with the booster doses. They've started the 12 to 17-year-old vaccinations. Many of the schools have started with the vaccination. The schools are starting, some of the upper secondary schools have started, year 10 and 11. As of Monday, year 1, 2, 3 will be starting. And from the 8th, I think the rest of the classes will start. So by 8th or 10th of November, schools will be in full swing for the moment, except those from 12 to 17 have been vaccinated or will be vaccinated. The only concern is about those below 12 years. Many parents are very worried about their children who have not been vaccinated and who fall in that category of between 5 and 12 years old. However, we have to wait and see what happens from the studies that are being done in the US. But otherwise, things are much better. The number of admissions have reduced. The number of deaths have reduced. So it seems to be a positive outlook for Malaysia in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. Can I invite Dr. Alvin from Hong Kong? Dr. Alvin, you have to unmute yourself.
So, next I want to give, because I have to be on the way.
Can you, Dr. Jamal, can you speak? I think Dr. Alvin is on mute. Meanwhile, he unmutes. Can you speak? Okay, he's there.
Dr. Alvin is unmuted. Okay,
yeah, Dr. Alvin.
Oh, yes. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for the good lecture, Dr. Tom. And in Hong Kong, everything's fine. And we are having the past week quite silent. In a way, we don't have local community cases, and we just have a few imported cases through the border with Hong Kong citizens coming back from overseas. They carried the mutant strains, and yet they are quarantined and isolated in the designated hotels for 21 days if they come from the high-risk regions, and 14 days if from the low-risk areas. And anyway, Hong Kong government is in the process of aligning with the policies of mainland China, that they keep zero tolerance, that is not to live with the virus, so-called. And so it's a tough time for Hong Kong, because we could not have the cross-border travel between Hong Kong and mainland China, and also not with the other places internationally. Well, we can go to other places like Singapore or Europe or Australia, say. Even USA or UK, just coming back from these places, we need to be isolated and quarantined for 21 days or 14 days, depending on which area it is. So it's still a tough time for the people making businesses, and difficult to make a living in Hong Kong right now. But then there's always hope, because the government is trying to relax some measures later if we can communicate with the mainland China later on. And in fact, many areas in the world had opened up the borders. I think it's difficult for Hong Kong to, well, really to still to pursue the zero tolerance policy. But I guess we need to align with the mainland China, because that is the main economic market that Hong Kong business people striving with. And also the prices of the foods and basic necessities have been going up because of these difficulties. I guess that's the same in UK and other places as well, because of the difficulty in finding people to cross the border. So that's how Hong Kong's like. Pandemic-wise, we are stable, thank God. Well, of course, we are also following the scientific data soon to give the third doses to the high-risk people, and also to vaccinate the 5 to 11-year age group. Soon, that will be taken place, implemented soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alvin. Dr. Jamal.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, because I have to be on the way actually to start. So this is like Bangladesh. You have in Bangladesh we have the current infection number is just below 300. So average week average is almost 250 something like that, and the number of deaths also is in the singular digit, and the vaccination, regarding vaccinations, you see the vaccination is going on. It says reinforced, and the government is very keen to vaccinate the people within the June of the next year, and it's going on. It's okay now. And regarding this SOP, maintaining SOPs in case of this masking, facial masking, it's very less, and everything is open. Schools are open in a limited way. There are some sort of restrictions out there, but still it's open. So universities also are open. So it's very, I don't know, even the people are not maintaining proper SOPs for preventing this COVID-19, but the number of infections are very less. Even some districts, in some majority districts, people are not going for the investigation also. They're not will to go for investigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pillai from India and World Medical Council.
Thank you. In India, of course, the situation definitely is under control, but still we have almost 14,000 cases daily. But then, as has been the feature, it is more confined to 1 or 2 states, and we can more or less say that it is getting under control, and the second wave is subsiding. But then we are prepared for a third wave, and arrangements all over India, strengthening of primary healthcare ICU setup, so that even up to 4 lakhs of people per day we can manage. So to that extent, the preparedness does continue. Vaccination front, almost 107 crores of people have been vaccinated totally. About 60% had both the doses, and 37% had single dose. There seems to be some resistance from the people to go for a second dose, but the government and the health department is trying maximum to see that the second dose also is taken. No new strain mutant has been identified so far, except AY42, which we know in America and England, this variant is producing more increase in the number of cases. India, again, AY42 variant has been identified in one state, but the number definitely is very low, and we are very cautious, and our consortium and on genetic study of the virus is very active on it, and how much it is a variant of concern has not been established, but then this has been in the minds of the concerned authorities. Then almost the whole of India is opening up. Travel restrictions are less. Flight, of course, if you have taken both doses of vaccine, then you can travel, and there is no quarantine for domestic travel. And the restriction on social distancing do continue. Mask wearing, again, is given importance. Up to 100 people can gather together, and that is ruled now. It may further relax this, tourism again is picking up. Schools are opening up. Primary school, including primary school, it is opening up. Only thing is all the teachers and other staff should have vaccination. Vaccination for children, a final decision has not been taken. That is age group of 4 to 14. But then studies are going on with various available vaccines, whether they can be vaccinated. About the Indian-made vaccine, Covaxin, the WHO is the process of recognizing it. Maybe one more sitting may be required before Covaxin is recognized by WHO. And we are cautious, but we are opening up. Industry also is picking up. Travel, tourism, schools, educational institutions are gradually returning to normal. Business again is returning to normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pillai. This was a good update. Can I invite Dr. Mary from Japan?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Tom, for wonderful presentation. Now here in Japan, we are the patient who has been tested positive less than 300 for the couple days. That means we are kind of in between the 5th wave and the 6th wave. And it's over the 70% of population had vaccinated for second time for fully. And Japanese pharmaceutical company produces the peptide vaccination the end of this year or early in next year. So that will change our vaccination program in your future, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, for the quick update. Can I invite Dr. Akhtar Hussain from Australia, from South Africa, sorry.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Dr.
I somehow always, with your name, I just get confused with the country, always. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. South Africa. Thank you, Dr. Tom, for excellent information and presentation. In South Africa, situation is almost other country. Last 24 hours, we had 475 new cases and the death recorded 47. Our recovery rate is 96.3%. Active cases is still 18,500. And so far, our total positive COVID-19 is 3 million, recovery is 2.8 million, and total death 89,151. And we have now, last few days, positivity rate is 1.4%. And the hospital admission reduced more remarkably. It's around 3,000 admission around the country, hospitals, and 500 in ICU, around 200 was ventilated. Vaccination, we have 22.3 million vaccination so far. And 12 to 18 years, we started last week. We are having a problem because there's a local election coming up from tomorrow, next 3 days. So there is a chances of non-adherence of SOP. Maybe we'll see some spike again. And that's the situation of South Africa. Thank you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Dr. Akhtar Hussain. Can I invite Dr. Kyun Hoon from Korean Medical Association, or Dr. Ko? Can you please unmute yourself, Korean Medical Association, Dr. Koon? Okay, meanwhile, can I invite Dr. Sajad from Pakistan?
Okay, Saurabh, thank you very much. Actually, Pakistan now in the same position. There is all the things are in normal routine. Everything is open because the number of cases is going down. From the last 1 week, it's between 500 to 550, sometime 600. So the number of cases going down, and everything is open. Cinema hall, schools are in normal. Schools, restaurants, market, marriage halls, everything is open. But unfortunately, people are not following the SOPs. Nobody is following the wearing the mask. Everybody is hugging and shaking hands. Everything thinking that now there is no more corona in Pakistan. So it's being clinician and being an activist of the Pakistan Medical Association. We are worried for another wave, God forbid. So, but the good thing is that the people are vaccinating themselves, and 45% have been vaccinated for a single dose, and 20%, more than 20% people are vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So the situation, I hope, is good, and in future, inshallah, will be more comfortable, more good. And I hope that this pandemic will remove absolutely all over the world from everywhere, so that people can meet each other. We are just depriving of seeing people of CMAAO, of World Medical Association, and the conferences we have. As we have the regular conferences everywhere. So this is why I'm saying that last night I'm just seeing my old pictures. I saw Akeke Agarwal in Malaysia, Japan, and Malaysia. So I remember him very much, and I appreciate Surab for continuing this his project, and you are very well managing this CMOG CMAAO meeting regularly. Good, well done, Surab, and thank you very much again, Dr. Tom, for presenting a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sajjad, for your kind comments. I think everyone over here is, a contributor to this, legacy moving forward. Without you guys, it was not possible, and you are the family for Dr. KK, extended family, I would say. So thank you so much. Do we have the Korean Medical Association? Can we please have an update from there if you are still online? Yes, can you please unmute yourself? I can see a message from you. Can you please unmute yourself? You have to click unmute button at the corner left bottom. We also have Dr. Ishi Khosla. Dr. Ishi, do you want to have any comments over here for us? The speaker today was being invited by Ms. Ishi Khosla.
Thank you, Saurabh. That was a wonderful session.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think food and nutrition issues are really coming up in a big way and for the right reasons. So congratulations for doing what you're doing. And I'm also glad to hear the updates globally. And it seems like things are looking up for everybody. And yet, I would just say that, we shouldn't let our guards down. And the best way to keep ourselves protected is to build our bodies and make them resilient through a good diet and good lifestyle. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I don't know, Dr. Kyung, are you able to unmute yourself? I know you're trying to do that. I see a message. I'm sorry, but I can't unmute. Okay. I will try again. Yeah, can you please try again? We have a Dr. Kyun, you just need to press an unmute button on the screen which pops up. I've just sent you a request for an unmute. Okay, I think he's not able to unmute himself. So with this note, we will close the session. We are closing the session early. Is anyone else needs to have any comments or questions or queries? Okay, thank you everyone for joining in for the 82nd session. We will be live again next week, same time, same day. We have Canadian Medical Association joining us. We will have a full update on the Canadian side of it. From the start of the pandemic, what they have done, how is it, what is the situation today, what is going on the vaccine side. So that will be a good session. I request everyone to join in next week, same time, same day. With this note, I would like to thank all the medical associations and the speaker today for joining us and making this session valuable for everyone. Thank you everyone for joining in, and we will close the session today. Thank you so much.